Ali, I'm going to start with you. We, of course, got these big criminal referrals from the committee today, but the big question is sort of what is going to be the impact of all of this? Could this be symbolic, or could the DOJ actually take some action here? What are you hearing up on the Hill?
And look, Yamiche, the ethos of this committee has been that they're not arguing in a court of law, they're arguing in the court of public opinion. For them, it's always been a question of putting referrals forward that gives some kind of public accountability to these people and to the people who are at the center of the January 6th insurrection. It strikes me, we knew the nature of these referrals from before the committee actually met today because of some reporting that we did here on Sunday. But the fact that they're laying exclusively at the former president's feet a charge of insurrection, inciting or assisting an insurrection, really does speak volumes about the way that this committee has focused its work the entire time that they have been doing the investigating and then the public presentations of what they've found. In each of these committee hearings, they have regularly driven back to the former president, what he was being told by people in his orbit, and what he did anyway. Specifically, the idea that he knew he lost the election and that he went forward with plans to overturn it, false slates of electors, pressure campaigns at the Department of Justice, within his own administration, with former Vice President Mike Pence, and then, of course, culminating with January 6th itself, the attack on the Capitol. All of that underscored by the referrals that were sent today. There's also, though, the question of what we're going to end up seeing once the full report is actually released on Wednesday. We know we're expecting 8 chapters to be in that, but then also the release of multiple other things like transcripts and other documents that we're all going to be poring over, because those are the things that could piece together maybe why they didn't do more referrals. I think one of the cliffhangers here, and I was asking Congressman Raskin about this after, is in the charges that they level on conspiracy and on obstruction. They say that they're leveling those against Trump, Eastman, and others. Those 2 words, and others, are doing a lot of work there, Yamiche. And what I asked Raskin and Schiff afterwards was, will we get a better sense in the report of who those people were? They said yes, but for them, and these are people who are looking at this in some cases as former prosecutors, in Raskin's case, a constitutional law professor, these are the people who they felt they had the most solid footing of evidence for. Because again, even though they're not arguing in a court of law, even though these referrals don't carry legal weight, they are arguing in the court of public opinion, and this is what they felt they had enough evidence for to present as a referral to DOJ.
And Vaughn, we saw this committee interview so many people from Trump's inner circle. Of course, former President Trump has been attacking this committee so much. What are you hearing from Trump world down there in Florida? What are you hearing from your sources on the reaction to all of this?
You know, largely there is a great deal of silence, Yamiche. Let's be very forward about this. For an attack on the U.S. Capitol, you know, we heard from Republicans on January 6th itself and in the weeks after, condemning Donald Trump and the role he played in the efforts to overturn the 2020 election. But what you hear now is largely silence from a great majority of Republican elected officials. And as one RNC committee man who I just got off the phone with told me, he said that, frankly, this is a badge of honor for Donald Trump, and that a great number of folks in the Republican Party apparatus, who a large number of them who can give credit to Donald Trump for them ascending to their own posts within this Donald Trump-led Republican Party, that they see that this is one that just emboldens him and really makes him square up in his capacity to go up against Democrats as they're looking for the Republican nominee. As for Donald Trump, I think to that very point here, he has so far put out only one statement on his social media account since the referrals were made to the Department of Justice, and that had to do directly with Liz Cheney. It was, quote, but Liz Cheney lost by a record 40 points. When you're looking at this Republican Party, Yamiche, it is very much one that is much more in his image. That over the last 6 years, he was able, through the course of primaries and past general elections, was able to really make this party one that is loyal to him. And the question is now, where does that go from here? You know, it was Mike Pence actually earlier this morning on Fox who suggested that the January 6th committee was largely a political ploy by Democrats, and that he did not believe the Department Department of Justice should prosecute Donald Trump. But when you're talking about Donald Trump's own reaction, he largely has not denied the basics of the substance of the allegations and evidence put forward by this committee. More so, it's been about him throughout the last year justifying the actions that were laid out in this anticipated report from the January 6th Select Committee.
And Jake, Vaughn there is saying, is telling us that former Vice President Mike Pence, he's calling this a political ploy. There are some Democrats who are even worried that this could end up being symbolic, even if this isn't, in their minds, a political ploy. They say that maybe these committee members are speaking to history. What are you hearing from your sources on the potential impact of these criminal referrals and this committee overall?
This is only a political ploy, Amish, because Kevin McCarthy decided not to put anybody on this committee in what a lot of people consider to be a major miscalculation of McCarthy's time in the Republican leadership. He decided to not have any pushback, to not have any insight into how the committee operated, and thereby, has no real ability to get back against the process or the substance here. I will say what Ali said is right in that we're going to get the full report, transcripts, and we're going to, for the first time, potentially, be able to see under the hood of this committee, and there will be a whole kind of downstream effect of politics there, because we'll see who the committee interviewed, what they said, presumably, that we don't know. My guess is we're going to be, and I think Ali alluded to this, we're going to be probably not surprised by a ton of this, considering just the amount of hearings, the number of hearings that this committee has had over the last 6 months. This is their 10th and final hearing, so we've heard a lot. But the report will be interesting. And I think, again, going back to what Ali said, I don't mean to give her too much credit, but going back to what Ali said, this is putting into history a very monumental and momentous moment in American history. They are cementing, they are documenting an attack on the Capitol, an unprecedented attack on the Capitol. And so while the Justice Department may or may not act on it, the Ethics Committee probably won't act on it, this is probably the most successful congressional committee effort in definitely contemporary time, but potentially ever. That we've never seen anything like this. And this is, it's easy to say this is a blueprint for the future, but it's not. These dynamics will probably hopefully never rear themselves their heads again. And I think we can't underestimate, understate, or undersell how important and critical this effort has been.
And Ken, as Jake points out, the sort of legacy and historical moment of this, of what we're all living through, there are a lot of Democrats who are hoping that this now goes to your beat, to the Department of Justice. But these criminal referrals have no legal weight. So explain to everyone out there who's wondering, why are we here? What's the point? And is your sense that the DOJ might be influenced, if at all, from this by these referrals?
The criminal referrals have no legal weight. They're largely symbolic. But it's not to say that the committee had no influence on what the Justice Department was doing, because there was a time there where it seemed like the committee was out ahead of the Justice Department in its investigation. And there were clearly some moments during those televised hearings, I know from my own reporting, that really got the attention of people who are working on this criminal investigation, which has now accelerated far past where it was. The Justice Department has a robust January 6th grand jury investigation ongoing, and they have tools at their disposal that are a lot more powerful than what the January 6th committee has, and they'll have the benefit of all the evidence that the January 6th committee has gathered. And so while the referrals don't mean anything in terms of the charging decision the DOJ is going to make, they are well down the track of investigating this case. And at some point, Special Counsel Jack Smith will have to make a decision about whether he decides there are any charges to bring.
And you touched on it, but there's also going to be a lot of evidence given over to the DOJ. How interested is the DOJ in all of that? How much could that impact their work?
Well, they've been interested for a long time in getting their hands on these transcripts, and they haven't gotten them, and that's been a source of frustration at the Justice Department. Now the idea that the committee is going to make all this public is also going to be a source of frustration, because as Chuck Rosenberg will tell us, no prosecutor wants all the evidence in public for the potential defendants and witnesses to see what everyone else said. Now, it may be that in this case, because we already know so much about the evidence, that has less of a factor. But there's no doubt. I mean, this committee investigated for a year and a half, and they produced a huge record of transcripts and interviews, and the DOJ will, to some extent, benefit from that record.
And, Chuck, I want to bring you in. Of course, you've been with us at NBC throughout all of this. I wonder what you make of sort of the decision to make these criminal referrals. And do you think that maybe the lawmakers have proven their point, have really proven their case, rather, in the way that they laid it out?
So I agree with Ken completely. The referrals, as a sort of evidentiary matter, as a substantive matter, as a procedural matter, have no meaning at the Department of Justice. I also agree that it may put a little more heat on the department, but that cuts both ways, Yamiche. Ken was speaking of it, I think, in the sense that it would spur them on to more action or light a fire, and maybe early on that was necessary. But I worry about it also having a different effect, a backfire, if you will. The Department of Justice, I come from there unbiased, but I believe, in my heart of hearts, is independent, apolitical, and wants to be perceived as independent and apolitical. And so receiving a mostly partisan referral from a mostly partisan committee and then acting on it, if indeed they charge people with crimes down the road, may make it look in some quarters like they're doing the bidding of Congress. That's not a good look for the Justice Department. And so because the it'd be one thing, Yamiche, if they were referring a case that the Justice Department knew nothing about and would never know about but for the referral. That's clearly not what's going on here. And so I don't think it's helpful.
And Allie, I mean, jump in here when you think about what Chuck and Ken are saying about how much this might not matter to the DOJ. What's your reaction? What are you hearing from lawmakers about that sort of line of thinking? And I also wonder what you make of the House ethics referrals, whether or not that might be being seen as differently from the criminal referrals.
Well, of course those are being seen differently. I mean, look, we'll take it in both parts, right? What Ken and Chuck are talking about here is the concern within DOJ that this could, as Chuck is saying, make this look in some ways partisan. What the committee has really tried to do, and it's impossible to make everything, devoid of politics in this day and age, because politics is so inextricably linked with everything that happens regarding the former president. But the committee has tried to argue that this is less about the politics of Trump and more about the ethos and the moment of American democracy. They have tried to elevate this as best they can above the petty partisanship that often takes over on Capitol Hill. The reality, of course, is that none of the people on this committee are friendly to the former president. And I think to Jake's point, this is the miscalculation on the part of Republicans for not putting people on the committee when they had the chance, because this is a committee the likes of which you'll never see again. The fact that they got to present the narrative that everyone on the committee wanted, there was no moment of cross-examination from people on the dais who didn't want the narrative that this entire committee was pushing towards. That's the way most normal committee hearings are. You hear from one side, you hear from the other side, they both talk to the witnesses, they each have points to make. That is not what we saw with the January 6th committee, and it's so unique. The other point on the Ethics Committee referrals, and everyone up here in Congress will tell you this, is that the Ethics Committee is slow-moving, but also it's split between Republicans and Democrats, and they've only got about a week left of legislating up here. So in the same way that this committee has always been up against the clock, certainly they are up against the clock on these Ethics Committee referrals, and the fact that they're doing so at the end of the year means we're not likely to actually see anything stem from them. It's also notable that we're only seeing them refer 4 of the 5 members, of course leaving Mo Brooks out of this, but this is sort of, you see the names on the screen there: McCarthy, Jim Jordan, Scott Perry, and Andy Biggs, 4 of the 5 who failed to comply with their subpoenas. A notable final piece to that thread that we've been waiting to see how it wrapped up, but certainly doesn't give them any more answers.
And Vaughn, as we're thinking about all of this, it sounds like a statement coming out from Tony Arnado. Can you talk a bit about that and explain to people who Tony Arnado is, and of course how that maybe connects to Cassidy Hutchinson, which is still explosive testimony that I'm processing. So talk about that.
Right. Tony Ornato was a key figure, particularly around Cassidy Hutchinson, being a corroborator. Much of the conversations that she relayed came directly, she contended, from Tony Ornato. That included the ordeal that she said that she was told about having taken place there after Donald Trump delivered his speech at the Ellipse there, in which there was an altercation of sorts inside of the motorcade in which Donald Trump, as she said, says that she was told, demanded that he be taken to the U.S. Capitol. But now Tony Ornato's lawyer is out here with a statement to NBC News, and I just want to read this here in quote. It says, Mr. Ornato remained cooperative during the entirety of the committee's investigation and testified truthfully before the committee on 3 occasions. It is clear from the introductory material to the final report that the committee did not fully appreciate or understand Mr. Ornato's role and responsibilities as the Deputy Chief of Staff for Operations. Most of the committee's questions were about emails that he has neither sent nor received. It is also clear that they did not fully appreciate or ignored Mr. Ornato's testimony regarding the president's request to go to the Capitol. Now, Tony Ornato used to lead the Secret Service detail for Donald Trump before he entered the staff and became Deputy Chief of Staff to President Trump there in late 2019, and that is why he was such a pivotal figure in this. After Donald Trump left the White House, he then returned to Secret Service before retiring this fall after Cassidy Hutchinson's damning testimony in which she relayed conversations that she said took place between her and him.
Well, an important update. And Ken, I want to come back to you. What more could we still learn from this report? There's the executive summary, but what else could come from this?
I'll tell you what I didn't see in the executive summary, and we were hoping to see, is any explanation of why the FBI, the Secret Service, the Capitol Police failed to act on the intelligence that the report goes into at length, that there were people coming to the Capitol on January 6th to do violence. That was part of the charter, the resolution that created this committee. They were supposed to look into that. I know for a fact that an entire team of investigators spent the last year and a half looking at it. They have some findings. We didn't see any reference to that in this executive summary released today or at the hearing. Now, it's possible it'll be included in the larger report, so that's one thing that I'm looking for.
And briefly, Chuck, talk to us a bit about how we might be able to still be, I guess, be kept in the dark now that it's the DOJ's work that will be going on here.
Sure. I mean, that's where the action is now. But you ought not see it. Yamiche, that may be frustrating to journalists and viewers, but if an investigation is done properly and lawfully, it's done quietly and secretly. And so my hope is that there's a serious ongoing investigation. We have every reason to believe that there is, and that we know nothing about it until the Department of Justice speaks in court, which is where they ought to speak.
So we're going to be waiting for a while to hear what comes next.
Well, I don't know when something comes next, but this department has been very good about not putting statements out and leaking matters to the press, maybe to Ken's frustration, although if anyone's going to get it, it'll be Ken. But if done well and if done right, it's done secretly and quietly.
And Ken, it sounds like I'm just going to wrap to you. Tell me a little bit about whether or not this might impact, I guess, if President Trump running might impact sort of the DOJ's investigation or their decision, because there was some feeling that former President Trump got out there early so he wouldn't be indicted.
And the result of that was the special counsel, because that was a close call. There really technically isn't a conflict of interest, but Merrick Garland decided that the right thing to do was to appoint a special counsel. He's not an independent counsel. He still reports into the Justice Department. All the same people who are doing the investigation are now reporting to him, Jack Smith. And Merrick Garland ultimately will have to sign off on the charging decision that he makes. And we'll hear about it. He'll have to write a report to the Attorney General about his charging decisions. But that has largely been the result of Trump's candidacy, and I don't think there will be any other implication from it.
And Jake, tell me a little bit about what comes next year. You have House Republicans coming in. Many of them denied the results of the 2020 election. They're vowing to do their own investigations. What are you hearing about whether or not there might be even a little bit of revenge there, or maybe just like a completely new focus for Congress?
There's going to be a revenge. I have to imagine that, take Adam Schiff for one, he won't be on the Intelligence Committee, which isn't directly related to this, but there's been talk about retribution to Benny Thompson, the chair of the committee. I have doubts that they'll actually do that. Republicans will actually do that. Kevin McCarthy sent a letter asking for the January 6th committee to preserve documents. It's mostly for show. The committee is not going to go and light their documents on fire. They're going to preserve them either way. But we'll have to see what McCarthy decides. I mean, he could decide to launch an investigation into security failures on January 6th. Republicans have been very adamant, I would say, that Nancy Pelosi did not provide adequate security on January 6th, which is completely wrong. We know that Donald Trump did not ask for National Guard or approve National Guard to the Capitol. We know the real story here. But listen, there's a whole host of people in the House Republican Conference, people that Allie and I cover every day, who believe that January 6th was a minor incident that has been overblown by the press, which is complete nonsense. I was here. It was not minor. It was not overblown. But the investigation story is one of the big stories we're going to be covering over the next 2 years, Amish, and I think it will touch in some respect on January 6th.
Well, Allie, Vaughn, Jake, Ken, Chuck, thank you all for joining on such a historic day.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.